Right, here I go. This is. I've done this so many times, so I hope I do well this time because I want it to be my last. Um. Anyways, hello audience, which right now is just my phone camera. Um. My research paper was on the foster care system and the shortcomings of the American foster care system, and I also explored some solutions that could work to improve the system. So, for this presentation, I want to take you guys on a first person journey through what it might look like to be a foster care child. So, without further ado, let's move on. Um, so you're probably wondering why the sandpaper graphic is up here. Well, it's because I'm using it as a metaphor for the rough life that they have starting out. The average kid entering foster care is only 8 years old and they've already gone through so much. 5% of them enter the foster care system because their parents have died. 30% enter because both of their parents are incarcerated and can no longer take care of them. And 65% come from an abusive household home. And of those kids that come from an abusive home and have abusive parents, 4,500 of them run away. That's about 1% of all kids in the foster care system. Now, for these kids that run away, they face a lot of dangers living on the street. After all, they're young children without any home and any protection. They are extremely vulnerable. A lot of them get raped. A lot of them are human trafficked. They get exposed to drugs. And if you don't know about, meth and carfentanil, carfentanil is a really high concentrated version of meth, and even just inhaling the air around the bandages of a carfentanil addict can make a child overdose. It's that bad. They're also exposed to gang activity, which isn't surprising because a child that, is young can get away, is a perfect candidate for a gang member because they can get in trouble, and most of the time courts give them, a slap on the wrist, hoping that as an adult they'll make more responsible decisions and that they've learned their lesson. But, okay, let's compare some responsibilities. So, I'm sure, my audience of young adults, mostly, the transition from being a high school student to a responsible young adult taking college classes was not easy. You had to start shopping for yourself, getting your own groceries, feeding yourself. If you don't stay in a dorm, you have to put a roof over your head. You have to manage your schoolwork, and many have to have a job. A lot of foster care children also have to take up these responsibilities. If their parents are neglecting to feed them, they also have to find a way to feed themselves. They do have to manage to find their own shelter if they ran away from home because their home is unsafe. And they do also have to manage school. To what extent they do that, it's not always the best. Foster care children are not known to have the best grades, but they still do go to school. The point is that these kids are taking on responsibilities of someone much older than them, and this is no way to have a good childhood. Now, when CPS finally places you into the foster care system, foster care children don't have a lot. And being placed into the foster care system, you're forced to give up the very few things that you do have. You lose all friendships that you may have had. You lose the familiarity that you used to have. You're being placed in a weird new environment. You're separated from your siblings lots of times, which sometimes can be the only positive and good bond a child has in their life up to this point. And as a result, this makes it really hard for them to develop social skills. You might see on screen another fancy little graphic I put together. If you can't tell, that is a foster child, and that is a home. And it's supposed to represent that there are a lot more children. There are foster homes. Finding a caring family in America is super, super hard. There are an extreme lack of foster homes in America. In 2014, 415,000 children were in the foster care system. And there were only enough houses to house 32% of them. And keep in mind, most foster homes average 2.5 foster children per household. And even housing this many children, not even half of them have homes. So, this is obviously a problem because, well, of course you're not getting into that foster home, but also there is a huge rush to be put in a foster home. The social workers are pretty desperate to find, an open home to put a child in. And sometimes they fail to do their best at finding someone who's actually safe. Lots of times, kids can end up in a home that's even more harmful and neglectful than their actual home. And some foster parents are like this because of the government compensation that they receive. Now, this is also a result of the urgency to find foster care. There is some money to be had for fostering a child. It's between $400 to $700 depending on, how old the child is and other pre-existing factors that come with that specific child. And a lot of foster parents, what they do is they spend as little money as possible on these children. That way they can make a profit. As a result, 15% of the foster kids report being abused by their host family. 10% report abuse from other foster siblings. And foster children are 42% more likely to die than a child from the general population. So, let's say we finally find a home to move into, now that we know how dangerous it can be. The longer you stay in the foster care system, the more you tend to move around. In the first 6 months, expect to have at least one home change. And over the course of the year, as you can read on screen, it's not uncommon to move 3 or more times. So, what's up? Why are we moving around so much? Well, it's mainly because the U.S. is doing a very good job of getting new foster homes and new foster parents into the system. But as a result, these foster parents are very unprepared. And you have to keep in mind, many of these foster children come from a very troubled past. Most of them have experienced trauma, and 10% have disabilities just from being neglected by their host families as young children or babies. And these social issues, the trauma, the disabilities, it can be a lot for a parent who's not prepared to have a foster child yet. And this constant moving around can actually be really, really harmful for the child. They feel a lack of control over their life, and quite frankly, they do have a lack of control over their life. Because there are so many people controlling their life, but they often don't get a say. The constant moving around makes it really hard to build social skills, and it also teaches them that building social skills aren't even worth it, especially because those relationships that they've built might not mean anything in a few months. As a result, they often don't confine to the social norm and have bad behavior. And these manifest themselves in the forms of antisocial personality disorder and oppositional defiance disorder. So, let's say we finally get to try to leave the system. Ideally, you would only spend 6 months to a year in the system before being reunited with your family or being adopted. But in reality, the average foster care child spends a year and a half. But it gets even worse. 64,300 of them spend 3 or more years in the foster care system. 28,000 of them spend 5 or more years. And 20,000 of them never leave the system, and they age out of the system lacking critical life skills. And of these kids that do end up finally leaving the system, 30% of them re-enter the system in a year because they were reunited into a unsafe home prematurely. So, what does life after the system look like? Well, I'll tell you. It's nothing to look forward to. 50% of them graduate the foster care system without graduating from high school, meaning half of them don't have, their high school certificate. Many of these foster children go back to being homeless. In fact, 25 to 40% of them do. And almost 80% of inmates were former foster care children. So, the United States can absolutely do better, and they need to do better. The default for foster children should not be failure. It shouldn't be predetermined, that a foster child will end up homeless just because they're a foster child. The American foster care system needs to set these children up for success just as any other child would. Also, these foster children are our future as much as any other kid that's their age. They're going to be the future generation that is working in America. And an unprepared working field is not going to do America justice. And it's not going to do them justice. What needs to change is this generation. This generation needs to be the difference. This generation needs to, raise their kids the same way they were raised. Most of us had the privilege of being raised by very nice parents that made, they were on our behind, making sure we did our work, making sure we got into a good college like OSU. We need to do that for our children. That way, the foster care system is unneeded. Thank you. I hope that was good. Yeah, that was the presentation. Also, I think might be the first time you've heard my voice, Professor. So, yeah, voice reveal too. Okay, thank you.